Hello, all you wonderful and beautiful people, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this video. In today's video, we will talk about the best kings to ever rule England, and they came from the House of Plantagenet. They also yielded the worst results. As well as their short fuse and cruelty, these kings were renowned for their restlessness and charisma. They ruled England for more than a quarter of a millennium during the Middle Ages, during which time it developed into an organized, highly legislated European power from a civil war-ridden island backwater. We'll journey through the Plantagenet story. It's a story filled with high drama, including daring escapes, risky relationships, and evil violence. Let's get started because we have 250 years of history and 8 kings to cover. In this video, we will discuss how the Plantagenets were given their name after a young, dapper nobleman's hairdo, that there is a fine line between having too many and not enough royal descendants, and how important it was for Plantagenet kings to maintain the support of their wives. Starting point of a dynasty. King Henry I of England is inconsolable in the year 1120. His cherished son and likely heir just drowned while traveling across the English Channel. King Henry is compelled to turn to his daughter Matilda in order to preserve his dynasty. Matilda is haughty and arrogant, and unlike her recently deceased brother, she doesn't instill confidence in her father's barons. King Henry arranges for Matilda to wed wealthy landowner Geoffrey of Anjou in order to strengthen her position as the rightful heir to the English throne. Geoffrey is a handsome man. He particularly enjoys donning a yellow broom flower, known in Latin as a Plantagenista, in his hair. The Plantagenet house is founded. Even though Geoffrey and Matilda don't get along well, it doesn't matter. Their marriage is a significant political union, and they basically share the same goals. They succeed and have their first child in 1133. He's given the name Henry after his grandfather. The barons, however, remain unconvinced. The barons turn down Matilda after the old king passes away. They support Matilda's cousin Stephen, a different claimant with a lot of support. Stephen becomes king, but he performs poorly in his position. England soon becomes unstable due to his mediocre leadership. Matilda perked up her ears while contemplating in France. Perhaps this is her chance to reclaim the crown of England, which she feels is rightfully hers. The following turns out to be disastrous for England. For 9 years, Matilda's and Stephen's forces chase each other across the countryside, leaving destruction in their wake. There are endless battles, but the two sides are still at a standstill. English society disintegrates. The Anarchy is the menacing moniker given to this period of disarray. Henry, Matilda's son, is maturing in the meantime. He has a big chip on his shoulder and is gangly with ginger hair and whip smarts. He's developed a reputation as a quick-witted young man with a keen sense of strategy throughout France. Since he was 13 years old, he has led military expeditions into England across the English Channel. None have been very successful, but Henry has nonetheless displayed bravery and a respectable understanding of both war and diplomacy. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a 28-year-old remarkable woman, is drawn to Henry by his reputation. She is a strong noblewoman who the French king recently ignored because he thought she was too worldly and political. But she seems to prefer the ascendant young person with a vendetta over the monastic French king. Eleanor has a lot of territory, a royal lineage, and all the worldliness of an older woman to offer the 19-year-old Henry. This game will give rise to a dynasty, King Henry II's ascent. After 9 years of the Anarchy, England is worn out by 1153. English barons are tired of fighting. Henry thus offers them peace. If they let him become king, he will stop fighting. The barons will soon be on his side. It won't take long. After Stephen's death in 1154, Henry succeeds him as King Henry II. The English people view him as a conquering hero. A new era has begun. By Christmas 1158, Eleanor and Henry have 4 children under the age of 4. They don't waste any time establishing their dominance. The more Plantagenets there are, the clearer the succession will be in the future, which is good politics. But as Henry later learns, having numerous royal children can also be problematic. Henry has great success in his campaigns in France, but trouble is brewing at home in England. Thomas Becket, Henry's advisor, and Henry are close friends. Becket is a devout man, and Henry believes that makes him the best choice to be the new Archbishop of Canterbury. A friendly face leading the English Church will surely make things go more smoothly since Henry needs the Church's backing to solidify his rule in England. Not everything goes as expected. The low status of Becket scandalizes powerful clergymen, and Becket takes the criticism to heart. He immediately begins acting in the opposite of what Henry has been hoping once he is appointed archbishop. He sides with the church in almost all situations. Becket quickly turns into a major annoyance for the king. The tenseness grows. Finally, enraged, Henry insults his former friend by asking, "What miserable drones and traitors have I nurtured and promoted in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born clerk?" Inspiring 4 sycophantic knights to murder the archbishop in Canterbury Cathedral. They believe they are doing so at Henry's pleasure. The idea that the king gave the go ahead to kill an archbishop horrifies all of Europe. Henry is compelled to flee to Ireland, a backwater region of his empire. Eventually, his subjects depart, and Henry goes back to his domain. However, many think that he will undoubtedly face divine retribution for his actions. The very next year, the 3 eldest sons and his wife rebel against him, fulfilling the prophecy. Family conflicts. The gift that starts the family argument. King Henry decides to give some French castles to his son John. This infuriates John's older brother Henry, who refers to himself as the young king and is envious. Eleanor, their mother, is also displeased with Henry and her lack of authority. Each of her sons rebels as a result of her feeding their ambition. Their first move is to run away from Henry's wrath and seek refuge at the court of the French king. Eleanor is unsuccessful. Her husband quickly kidnaps and imprisons her. The entire rebellion doesn't accomplish much in the end. Since Henry is an accomplished military leader with devoted troops, his disobedient family has no chance of meaningfully opposing him. However, King Henry is more interested in business than retaliation. At home, he is busy building his own castle and demolishing those of his rivals. Additionally, he established royal control over the criminal justice system. He firmly establishes Plantagenet power in English society with this deed. Henry is now in his 50s. The world is developing. After a long reign, King Louis VII of France passes away. Philip II, his 16-year-old son, ascends to the throne. Henry's sons are not blind to the fact that a young king is taking the place of an elderly one. But who will succeed Henry's sons? The throne is something Henry the young king wants, but it won't happen. While his father is still alive, he passes away from dysentery. Richard, his younger brother, will now take his place. In 1189, Henry II finally passes away after 34 years in power. After being crowned, Richard takes swift action to establish his dominance. Increasing his reputation as a great warrior is one way to achieve this. There are plenty of wars to be had in the Holy Land, and Richard needs one. Richard the Lionheart, as he is later known, understands that glory can be found in the Third Crusade. But before he can leave, he needs to resolve 2 problems. First, his finances. Next, his relationship with Philip II. To raise money for the crusade, Richard travels the English and French countryside, obtaining taxes from soldiers itching to go on the road and soldiers who are already on the verge of leaving. Regarding Philip II, he and Richard agree to go on a crusade together, split the spoils, and refrain from attacking each other's territories in the interim by signing a mutual defense pact in 1190. But neither does. They have each witnessed far too much betrayal to trust one another. The relationship will only get worse from this point forward. The cunning brother. Philip II isn't having it easy because Richard, for starters, has called off his lengthy engagement to Philip's sister. Additionally, he has started to invade any city he chooses while traveling to the Holy Land, disregarding the agreement to divide the spoils. Then, as soon as Richard gets to the Holy Land, he begins stealing Philip's mercenaries. Philip sails home after a few months because he has endured enough humiliation. Richard considers his relationship with Philip in the East to be similar to being a cat with a hammer attached to its tail, so he is relieved to be free of his French counterpart. Like a duck to water, Richard quickly gets into crusading. But in 1192, he learns some unsettling news. His youngest brother, John, is conspiring to usurp him from the throne with his arch-rival Philip II. He suddenly realizes that, in the name of Christianity in the Holy Land, he has probably done enough. Perhaps it's time to head home. However, Europe has changed. During his years spent abroad, he alienated the majority of European nobles and enraged the remainder, making a lot of enemies. Richard is apprehended while traveling through Europe on his way home and handed over to Henry VI, the Holy Roman Emperor, as a prisoner. Richard is still supported at home, though. His allies put in endless effort to collect a sizable ransom for his release. After just 6 months, they are successful. Richard makes a triumphant hero's welcome in England. Meanwhile, with the assistance of Richard's cunning brother John, Philip II keeps encroaching on Plantagenet territory. Richard needs to stop this annoyance. After a few years of fighting, Richard succeeds thanks to military prowess and deft negotiations. Philip and Richard meet to negotiate a ceasefire in 1199. But Richard doesn't experience any peace. He rides off to put down a rebellion during a break in negotiations and is struck in the shoulder by a crossbow bolt. The wound is infected. He passes away at age 41. Europe is in disbelief. The corrupt John is currently in line to rule England. The majority of the Plantagenet Empire, however, strongly supports John's nephew Arthur after getting a sense of John's personality. John confines Arthur in horrible circumstances out of a sense of insecurity. The boy is then killed by him using only his bare hands. John's influence in Europe quickly disintegrates as word gets out. John permanently abandons all Plantagenet claims in Europe in 1203 and departs from Normandy. It took almost 100 years for his grandfather, father, and brother to establish dominance on the continent. John only needs a few months to undo it. A poor King John! The last English king to be compelled to rule within his own realm is John. And as he gains experience in leadership, England discovers what it's like to live with a restless, belligerent Plantagenet king. John is an excellent student of English law. He appears to care about the plight of the poor and sits in judgment wherever he goes, both traits that are remarkably uncommon for English kings. However, John's actions aren't all that selfless. Justice is a profitable endeavor because any fines and property forfeitures go back to the crown. John becomes a very wealthy king as a result of this and new taxes imposed on all movable goods in the nation. John, however, earns money from other sources as well. At every chance, he squeezes his victims and frequently resorts to heinous cruelty to get his way. The only people in England who are permitted to engage in moneylending are Jewish families, so he imposes a tax on them. He locks and tortures Jewish people in prison when they are unable to pay. John also raises the costs that barons must pay for milestone events, like getting their daughters married or having their sons knighted. He reserves the right to arbitrarily increase or eliminate these payments as he pleases. His already irate barons find this to be extremely frustrating. With all this money, John is able to put an end to insurrection on the outskirts of his realm. He starts to regain his confidence as a result of the bribery or suppression of rebels and barons in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. But in 1214, he goes too far. In an effort to reclaim lost continental territories, he confronts Philip II. The Battle of Bovines results in an utter defeat for his forces. The final straw was the devastating loss at Bovines. The barons are unable to remain silent any longer. It is clear that Plantagenet rule needs to be changed. However, what and how? John launches an attack rather than waiting for them to realize it. England is once more consumed by civil war. John is only forced to listen to them after the barons capture London. To discuss how to keep kingship within reasonable bounds, they convene at Runnymede. Although negotiations are difficult, a crucial precedent is finally established. The king is no longer permitted to act alone. He is now required to consult the barons before making major decisions and to follow the law. The Magna Carta is the name of the contract. Barons versus the king. John breaks the Magna Carta as soon as it is signed, in keeping with his cunning nature. The civil war intensifies once more. Then there is a reprieve. John passes away from dysentery soon after the war picks back up in 1215. By almost all accounts, John was not a good candidate to be king. However, presiding over the Magna Carta saves his reputation. Magna Carta is a remarkable, significant document that establishes the king's relationship with his subjects. It's time for a new king. Only 9 years old when his father passes away is John's son, the somber Henry III. He is put under the protection of John's royalist allies because he is far too young to hold authority. Because Henry lacks a good father figure, his entire reign will be marked by a never-ending search for leadership and parental support. It takes him until the age of 27 before he can dismiss his advisors and take control of his own government. To keep him from having too much power, the barons continue to hold fast to Magna Carta. Even though Henry is a politically inept figure, he is aware of the need to uphold his reputation. His wedding is fit for a king when he chooses to wed a well-connected French princess. Another royal wedding, a scandalous surprise union between Henry's sister and the opulent courtier Simon de Montfort, occurs around the same time as the king's wedding. The barons are upset about this marriage. The most eligible bride in the country is the king's sister, but because of her marriage to de Montfort, she cannot marry into their families. Political hostility towards Henry consequently intensifies. The birth of Henry's first son, Edward, in 1239 temporarily eases tension. A royal baby, however, cannot always mask the crisis. Henry's crazy plan to invade Sicily only serves to exacerbate the situation with the barons. The barons believe that this is a bad idea because Sicily is far away and an invasion would be costly. In 1258, they finally lose all remaining patience. The king is informed that a committee of barons will now govern the realm by 4 armed men who break into his quarters. The king is forced to alter some policies by the committee of barons. However, this does not promote stability. The current problem is the increasing influence of the king's-in-law and rebellious Simon de Montfort. The opposing forces of de Montfort and the king quickly start a civil war. In 1264, a battle between the two sides occurs in Lewes. Edward, Henry's military-minded and serious son, is the battle's main protagonist. But the royalist situation can't be saved by his outstanding performance. Prince Edward, age 25, is kidnapped and made the de facto king by Simon de Montfort. Edward Longshanks, Prince Edward is not imprisoned for very long. After a few months, he pulls off a daring escape and starts hatching plans to restore the Plantagenet throne with barons who are not happy with de Montfort. The two sides raise armies once more. In 1265, the decisive showdown takes place at Evesham on a chilly day. Prince Edward prevails this time despite the fierce competition. De Montfort isn't as fortunate. On the battlefield, he is hacked to pieces. Because of his intimidating build, Edward goes by the name Longshanks. The new king is mercurial in addition to being tall and well-built. He frequently switches allegiances during his rule and occasionally breaks his promises. He also possesses the infamous Plantagenet temper, and it is said that once he nearly killed a man. He is, however, a loving husband and father as well. 16 children were born to him and his first spouse, Eleanor of Castile. Edward's sword hand itches once more after he performs some diplomatic work on his father's behalf to help mend England's severe divisions. On a crusade in the Holy Land, he quenches his thirst for violence. When Edward learns that his father has passed away while en route back to England, he becomes both the legal and actual King of England. After a spectacular coronation, Edward's main worry is the Welsh because they are causing trouble in the West. In 1277, he raises his first sizable army with the intention of finally resolving a long-standing issue for the Plantagenets. In addition to fighters, the army has engineers who clear land and construct a number of enormous castles deep within Wales. The Welsh landscape is still dominated by many of these enormous fortresses. Years later, Llywelyn I, Prince of Wales, and his various kin are vanquished by Edward. He now concentrates on the disobedient Scots. He makes the decision to place a puppet on the Scottish throne. The Scots are against it. There is a full-scale conflict between England and Scotland. French relations are also getting worse. The two crowns engage in war after Edward rejects King Philip IX's bullying tactics. Additionally, the French and Scots form an alliance in 1296. Now, Edward's adversaries are cooperating. It turns out to be a demanding few years. While running around putting out fires in France and Scotland, they keep re-erupting. He is now older than 60 and he can tell. Additionally, he worries that his son and heir, Edward, may not be ready to rule. A poor king. Edward II resembles his father greatly and is a tall, fair man. But the similarities stop there. He's not a strong candidate for king by all accounts. For starters, he spends all of his time engaging in pointless activities, but his tendency to favor certain people is the worst. His first pick is the astute and ambitious French knight Piers Gaveston. Many believe that the two are in love because he causes the young king to develop an unhealthy obsession. Gaveston is given the most valuable Plantagenet title, Earl of Cornwall, by Edward after his father dies, and he ascends to the throne. The barons are outraged when it is given to a lowly member of the household retinue. Gaveston and Edward, however, continue on. At the king's coronation, where Gaveston receives special honors, The barons' outrage persists. The coats of arms of Edward and Gaveston, not Edward and his wife Isabella, Princess of France, are depicted on tapestries that adorn the walls of the banquet that follows. Edward effectively insults both his barons and the French royal family with one blow. Edward is compelled to exile his favorite by the English barons. They also establish the Ordainers as a council to manage Edward's reign. It demonstrates how little they believe in his ability to lead. The most influential of Edward's Ordainers is Thomas, Earl of Lancaster and the king's cousin. Edward feels humiliated and enraged. He responds by rejecting the Ordainers and calling back Gaveston. It's wartime once more in England. Gaveston is swiftly taken by the barons. Gaveston is executed by Lancaster after a court finds him guilty and renders judgment. Escalation is startling. Inconsolable Edward never forgave Lancaster. As Lancaster anticipates the king's wrath, he flees to his estates in the north to start assembling his army. Edward, meanwhile, is fixated on a fresh batch of favorites. Hugh Despenser the elder and Hugh Despenser the younger are the actors this time. As soon as Edward attacks Lancaster, war breaks out once more. His forces are victorious, and his retribution is brutal. He brutally executes Lancaster and the majority of the rebels. Rich rewards in the form of seized property and titles are given to the Despensers. His rule is further weakened by this cruelty and favoritism. Edward is about to meet his demise, but it comes from an unexpected source. The years he spent humiliating and abandoning his wife, Isabella, are about to catch up with him. Mighty Plantagenet. In 1325, Roger Mortimer and Queen Isabella are introduced at the French court. It's a lucky encounter because they fall in love and then overthrow the King of England. Isabella is in France on official business a few months after she first meets Mortimer. When she recognizes an opportunity, she requests that her son Edward II, who is also named Edward, come with her. When Isabella's family in France offers to protect her and her son, she refuses to go back. They do not remain in France indefinitely. The following year, they set sail for England with Prince Edward in tow to replace the problematic king. Barons swarm to her side, and the king loses allies as a result. The king is taken prisoner by Isabella's allies in just a few months. The public execution by torture of the Despensers. Edward II eventually caves, despite knowing that abdicating will result in a bloody death. His son Edward succeeds him as King Edward III, and as the previous monarch foresaw, Edward's demise is gruesome, where he is assassinated in prison. At the time of his coronation, Edward III is only 14, therefore the crown must be padded to fit his teenage head. It is obvious that Roger Mortimer and Queen Isabella will be in charge of running the country's actual operations. That is, at least their plan. But Edward quickly matures. He starts to feel oppressed by his mother and her partner. Edward offers a direct solution to the issue. In 1330, his allies sneak into Queen Isabella's private quarters at Nottingham Castle. They capture Mortimer as they arrive. As a traitor, he was tried and hanged. Without a doubt, Edward is in charge of his government at this point. The apex of Plantagenet kingship is Edward III. He appreciates the value of maintaining the support of his nobles and enjoys pomp and circumstance. He makes a new class of nobles who will be obedient to him in his court as one of his first actions. He is a talented and endearing sportsman who frequently joins his friends in jousting and tournaments while remaining anonymous. He not only excels in sports, though in 1333 he restarts the Scottish War and wins a stunning victory at Halidon Hill. But as long as they continue to receive support from England, it will be impossible to defeat the Scots. In typical Edward fashion, he focuses on France as the root of the issue. He makes an extraordinary demand when he steps off a ship in the Flemish city of Ghent in the year 1340. He claims royal descent from his mother, Queen Isabella, and asks the locals to acknowledge him as the King of England and France. It represents the start of the 100 Years' War. From arrogance to failure. With a decisive naval victory over the French at Sluys, Edward's war gets off to a strong start. At Crécy in 1346, he then handily defeats the French once more. He is assisted this time by his teenage son, known as the Black Prince. The following 10 years see Edward continue to rise to power through both domestic and foreign reforms that increase the wealth of the barons. As the icing on the cake of Edward's golden age, the French king is actually taken prisoner at the Battle of Poitiers. Everyone can see it. England is once again on the rise. But it is short-lived. the Black Prince contracts a crippling illness while running for office in Castile, which causes Edward's situation to spiral out of control. He never fully bounces back. The condition of the Black Prince is a setback for Edward. Another significant loss was the passing of Philippa, his beloved wife, in 1369. The once powerful Edward III is senile and has lost his heir just 7 years later. Richard, the Black Prince's 9-year-old son, is now the likely heir. Richard II is initially adored everywhere he goes. The boy develops an unhealthily high opinion of himself as a result of the adoration. He exhibits impulsivity and mercurial behavior, and when angry, he frequently screams. Soon, Parliament strips him of his power, just as it did to several of his ancestors. Richard exacts hateful retribution after years of simmering. The barons who voted against him, including one of his uncles, are brutally executed by him. Richard's first cousin Henry Bolingbroke becomes the most powerful noble in England in 1399, after another uncle passes away naturally. Richard exiles Henry from the realm because he feels threatened by his rightful claim to the throne. From here, things develop quickly. Henry observes the king's psychosis from Paris as he appears to be at war with his own nation. Henry recognizes his chance when Richard makes the odd choice to invade Ireland. Henry arrives in England in July 1399, and by August he is in charge of a worn-out England. The friendless king is taken into custody by him and kept in the Tower of London. The last of the Plantagenets is Richard II. He hasn't left any heirs because he thought his kingship came to him by divine right rather than through family descent. Henry is now the best candidate to take on the role. Henry Bolingbroke ascends to the throne as Henry IX in 1399, ushering in a new dynasty known as the House of Lancaster. Final thoughts. We've certainly traveled quite a distance. We began with Henry II, the first Plantagenet king, who ended a bloody civil war in England. Although Henry was a wise monarch, he had a falling out with the Archbishop of Canterbury and then with his entire family. Richard I, the Lionheart, Henry's son, succeeded his father as king. Richard was away from England for the majority of his life, either fighting or being held captive. The next bad king, John, was forced to sign the Magna Carta by the barons after losing all of his family's lands on the continent. Henry III, his son, also had issues with the barons. The three Edwards came next. Edward II was regarded as being weak. Edward III was the pinnacle of a Plantagenet king and won battles in Scotland and France. Edward I was a strong ruler who overthrew Wales. Finally, there was Richard II, a prima donna king who was deposed by Henry Bolingbroke, the founding monarch of a new dynasty. Thank you all so much for listening. We love and appreciate you all. If you can like and subscribe, it would mean a lot to us and our small channel. Have an awesome day.